Welcome to this episode of the Psyched podcast. I'm Kaya Roman, your host, and today I am so psyched to have Laura Dawn, incredible voice for the power of psychedelics to enhance creativity and leadership and just a force of nature. I am so excited, been waiting for this conversation for months. Laura, thank you so much for joining us. Let me tell you a little bit about Laura, you guys. This woman is so amazing. Laura Dawn, you may have heard her podcast. She's the host of the Psychedelic Leadership podcast, founder of Grow Medicine. She's a plant medicine integration guide, microdosing mentor for peak performers, executives, thought leaders, and entrepreneurs and creatives. She has a really incredible program for women entrepreneurs called Your Message is Your Medicine, really helping women to step into their leadership in the psychedelic space. Can't wait to hear more about that. Laura Dawn has over 2 decades of exploring altered states of consciousness. So she's been in this for a while. She has a master's in science, specializing in creativity and change leadership, and actually wrote her thesis on psychedelics and creativity, which is pretty epic. And she's at the forefront of exploring the intersection between psychedelics and creative problem solving, helping leaders and teams unlock innovative solutions to the complex challenges that we collectively face. So Laura, thank you so much for your work, and thank you for making the time to speak to us on the Psyched podcast today.
Thank you so much, Kaya, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, awesome. So I want to jump right into this concept of psychedelics and leadership. I think this is so innovative. You know, I live in Silicon Valley. Obviously, people have been microdosing and using psychedelics for a long time. Steve Jobs, it's coming out now, like all the people that used psychedelics at different times to come up with a lot of different innovations. But I love that you have kind of like formalized a way that you are helping leaders use psychedelics for leadership. So can you tell us more about that? What's the connection there?
Sure. Yeah, it's such a great question. So I think to start, just presencing the context that we live in right now is really helpful, because leaders, and I'll even just go beyond leadership to say really everyone who's alive today is being forced to navigate exponential change in a way that we've never experienced. So I don't think it's a new idea to say that things are always changing. I mean, that's like the true nature of reality, that everything is always changing. But I think what's different about today is that we're experiencing something called exponential change, where if you look at exponential change on a graph, even with AI technology, like what has been happening in the past few months, depending on when people are listening to this, like this year, 2023, the introduction of Chat GPT, AI artwork, there's a lot of new tools coming onto the scene. And so when we look at exponential change, it also looks at this concept of singularity with AI, so it's like where it's not changing, it's taking a long time. The graph is very horizontal, but then things exponentially change and it's like a straight up vertical line. Yes. And that's happening with population growth, with CO2 emissions. There's actually a lot of ways that we're seeing exponential change. I would say technology is really a big one, but maybe also like new users coming onto the scene of psychedelic usage, for example. There's this huge exponential wave happening. So, and we could say the same about the amount of information we're being exposed to now compared to before. So in a way, we, as in all people, but especially leaders, are really having to face this kind of rapid change that goes actually against how we're biologically hardwired. We actually like to sit from a biological or an evolutionary biological perspective. We like novelty, but we like to not just hurl ourselves over the edge of constant novelty and constant chronic change. That there's like
that can be stressful.
Right. It causes anxiety. There's like a window that we like to operate in, but there's definitely a strong evolutionary pull to cling to the shores of safety, the shores of like the known, rather than constantly pushing off of the known into the unknown, where it's just constant uncharted territory all the time, which leads to chronic fatigue, to stress, to burnout. And so we're having to really cultivate this new sense of resiliency. And right now, the interesting thing is, I like to joke that there's kind of this overhaul, this rebrand, this parallel rebrand going on between psychedelics and creativity at the same time. And I'm going to point to the connection here and come full circle, if you just stick with me for a moment, where this leads to leadership. But there's this cultural redefining of what it means to be creative, because just like psychedelics are coming out of the Nixon era of propaganda, of drugs are bad, we're also coming out of this era that creativity is for this select few. There's the creative select geniuses and then everyone else. And it's most likely that you're in the everyone else camp, and that you either have it or you don't. You can train it or you can't train it, or you don't have it. And so now, let me say that again. Most people think that you can't train creativity, that you either have or you don't. And so there's this interesting and also this narrative that creativity equals art, music,
right,
dance, poetry. Like if you're not in those categories, that we're not thinking about creativity. And so right now, what's interesting, and this is what actually compelled me to go back to graduate school, was I started, and this was in about 2019, leading up to the pandemic, before I launched my last really big retreat with 40 entrepreneurs, teaching frameworks around how to work with psychedelics to tap into visionary states, etc. And I noticed that as I was doing all this research, and I love developing my own framework, so I read widely. I read a lot about psychedelic research and neuroscience and all of it. And I started coming across statements that really caught my attention, like from the World Economic Forum, saying that creativity was now being called the most important skill set for leaders of our time.
Makes sense when you talk about the AI, because it's like, what can AI not do? Right? Creativity, unique creativity.
Well, this is really interesting. And we could get into this a little bit more deeply, but are you familiar with ChatGPT yet?
Yeah, for sure.
So you can see that they are actually able to be, quote unquote, like replace certain levels of creativity, because writing a thesis paper requires creative thinking. And you can put into ChatGPT, write me a thesis paper on creativity and psychedelics, for example, and it will actually populate and pop something out. So for me, my perspective right now is that it's not like AI versus humans. It's more like humans who are going to learn the tools of AI to enhance and augment their own cognition, which is augmented cognition is really a field that I'm super interested in and passionate about, because they help us to think differently. Like AI is a tool for augmenting our cognition, and so is LSD. And so, and that's like real in a very real sense, that these psychedelics are tools for enhancing our cognition, augmenting it is how I like to say it. But then there's other ways to think about cognition, like extended cognition and distributed cognition, which we won't dive too deep into. But I really think that the people who are going to really lead in this next chapter are people who know how to draw upon the tools to think differently. And that's at the essence of what psychedelics help us do. They help us shake up our current habitual frames of reference and think differently. And that is going to be truly a superpower of leadership for this era. And there's a lot that we could also say around, the Venn diagram, the overlap between psychedelics and leadership. Of course, there's so many other aspects that we can hit, like it's not looking at just augmenting our cognition, but leading from an embodied place that's embodied in our values and aligning our vision with our values. And so the creative thinking, the creative problem solving, which is such an area that I love. I also love to talk in terms of Venn diagrams. So if we were to really look at the overlapping circles of psychedelics, leadership, and creativity, that's the direction that we would lead in. But if we're just talking about psychedelics and leadership, leadership, that aspect of creative cognition is just one sort of chunk of modules that I'm working with people. Because, in addition to thinking creatively and coming up with new ideas to innovate, hopefully we're training leaders who are working with psychedelics to innovate in a way that's beneficial for humanity. So I weave in a lot of Eastern philosophy, other kinds of tools for transformation that really help you, because as an entrepreneur, if you go into journey space and you have an idea, actually, if you really train yourself to listen to your body and work with these higher intelligence, like ayahuasca, for example, I think we actually really intuitively know in our body whether we're in integrity with stepping forward with that kind of idea. Not not to make those decisions while you're in the space, but actually way after those windows of very heightened, enhanced cognitive flexibility, after sort of the dust settles, for example. So I think there's a lot to say in terms of that, but also really looking at, embodied values, living in alignment with our North Star, and teaching people actually how to cultivate vision, which is also another huge overlap around, psychedelics and creativity and psych and leadership, because I personally think that that's one very underexplored area in the psychedelic space at large, like the sheer benefit of actually tapping into what we know as imaginal realms and not discounting that as something that is, child's play, or like you're just,
just
going
an hallucination.
Exactly. But there's actually a lot of things that I can say about the true validity and benefit of exposing your mind to radical combinations of ideas where things are so far out, you're really shaking up the default mode network, your frame of reference. That's actually what leads to novel insights further down the road. So there's just so much that we could dive into all of this.
Oh, I love that. I'm so glad that you're bringing up this, concept of the visions, because I think it can be confusing for people sometimes, maybe if they aren't having the right guide, especially when they have these visions in ceremony and then they're like, but what do I do with it? So I love this concept of like ceremonially informed leadership that you have said. And I'm, just like how the visions in a medicine experience can transfer over to like business ideas and business decisions. So can you tell me a little bit more about that? Like how you guide the people that you work with to use that visionary state as leaders?
Yeah. Well, what I'll maybe do is actually just speak about my direct experience with that process myself. So, which is definitely not like the conventional norm, I would say, like in terms of, there's a let me pause here for a second. I think it requires actually a lot of courage to speak your truth in the space, in the psychedelic space today, especially as a woman, when you are at the forefront of something that you're creating that other people might not necessarily say, like, you know what, that's kosher. That's outside the box. It's outside of the psychedelic assisted psychotherapy box. This is what we do. You're either an indigenous lineage or you're a therapist. And those are the two main camps. And if you're outside of that, it's really not so easy to actually really share what you're working with, because there's a lot of judgment, which to me, the whole purpose of working with psychedelics is that they open your mind. They open your mind.
Release judgment and attachment to everything.
Yeah. And they open your heart. And when we're able to work with medicines in a way that we learn how to train our nervous system to stand tall in our truth and really actually say, this is my truth, and carve our own path forward, that's really powerful. And this is actually one of the things that I teach in my Your Message is Your Medicine program for medicine women entrepreneurs, because it's really, and this is a core theme I see constantly coming up. And I know I'm derailing the question here. I'm going to come
okay.
back to
I love it.
But it's really actually very present for me, because I've seen so many women in my programs who are so afraid to speak their truth. They're like, I'm getting these downloads about combining, ayahuasca with like Mayan calendar theory that I'm just like so into right now, but I'm not indigenous. I'm, and even like people who are like of color expressing that, which is, and I'm just like, wow, there's so many gifts that we all have that if you really genuinely cultivate your own practice and you anchor your own practice and you choose to step forward with the gifts of that and share that with other people, then that's really a gift and it requires so much courage to do that. And, the last thing I'll say about that is that we can't wait for other people to pick us, we just have to pick ourselves and choose our own path. And in that self permission comes also equivalently an enormous amount of self-responsibility. So we can't just like erratically, step out in these ways that are not thought through or really anchored or really grounded or really rooted in truth and our values and our visions that are like really coming from a place that have depth to them. Not just like, oh, I drank ayahuasca once and I got this vision and now I'm going to like launch a big company based on this. I would say that those roots just aren't deep enough. Long time to sort of deconstruct our psyche in a way that really changes our actual perception of the world. And so, I think that takes time. That takes actually decades, in my opinion. And so there's an evolution that happens, but as we grow, we share. And there's this really powerful philosophy that comes right from Indigenous elders that says, stay behind the medicine. Don't get too ahead of yourself. So it's like this balanced place of not like, oh my God, I have these ideas, so I'm going to step out and share them. Like we have to stay centered in, okay, I'm not also going to debilitate myself, be crippled by fear of being seen, but I'm also not going to like rush ahead. So I think like this point of what I'm really speaking to also really speaks to psychedelic leadership is like, really learning how to move from a centered place where you're supported and you stay behind the medicine and you don't get ahead of yourself.
Yeah. Okay. I feel like I'm getting a sense of what you teach in your messages, your medicine. And I'd love to hear more about that program because I find it very intriguing that you've chosen to focus on women and women leaders stepping into the psychedelic space. Obviously, this is the Women in Psychedelics Network. I love even, hearing Paul Stamets give a keynote address at a conference recently saying this is just really the time for women leaders. It feels like, okay, the men have had their turn and now we need to like heal this mothership and we really need women leaders to step up. So I'd love to know, like, how did you choose to create a program for women? And if any insights that you can give us as to how you guide women leaders to step into the message being their medicine.
Yeah, there's a lot of layers there for sure.
There is.
And I would love to circle back around to the visionary question too at some point, because I do think that that's really an interesting area to focus on, which is also definitely part of this work. And I don't only work with women, but I felt really inspired to create a program for just women because at that point, all of my programs have been mixed gender, which is beautiful. And I love work. I work with a lot of males, especially male executives who are also on the medicine path. But there was something really special in that I felt really called to create just for medicine women because we face our own unique challenges and to create a safe space for women to come together and express and talk about what some of those challenges are. And it was actually after where we met, Kaya, at Meetdelic, where I was one of the keynote speakers for that event. And I was speaking about my work in psychedelics and creativity. And I had so many women come up to me at that event expressing like, how do I do what you do? How do I lead in this space? And it was after that Yeah, I think I'll weave in this other thread here that I was sitting with the medicine pretty regularly and really just feeling into what could that look like. And so my creative process is actually both simultaneously very slow. And then I have these kind of big shoot ups of like quick creativity and rapid creation because I sit with things, I feel into it, and I start visioning. Okay. And where I go into visionary realms, and this is not like because this is how I do it, that everyone needs to do it. It's almost like I can see things on a screen and I'm working with it in a 3 multi-dimensional realm where I'm like, oh, okay. So when I get into a really clear channel where I'm like, okay, yes, I want to do this. I want to move forward with this. I actually build it in my mind. And what I really teach other people is how to become an architect of the mind. And it's not just mental, So when people are like, oh God, I think that there's like this funny undertone in the psychedelic space or in the spiritual space that is like, God, you are so in your head, like you're so heady and you need to be more embodied. But cognition is not just in your head. It's aligned with that mentality, I think, is more separating and segregating the mind-body connection that we actually already are. So when I build in my mind, I'm actually it only happens, those real visionary creation realms. First of all, it's taken me 25 years to cultivate this practice. So it's not something that I started with a long time ago. But I only can get to that very clear channel when I have a certain kind of like activation in my nervous system. So I'm essentially inducing something like a flow state in my own practice because a lot of my practice is actually solo. And I have set up my practice in a way that allows me to really go to that place where I can create. And it's not like an aim all the time, but it's just like, can I put all these ingredients together to sort of create like a nest to hold me in that is conducive to these sort of transmissions that come through. But sometimes I'll sit with something with an idea for a while, and then it will like really anchor in one sit. And then, for your message is your medicine, I've been thinking about it for months, really playing with it. And this is where we could go into creative cognition. It's helpful to like focus, but then open focus, like let your wander. It's like when you get your best ideas on your walk, you're not really thinking about it. You're away from it. That's actually very much what the psychedelic space is conducive to, these unconstrained modes of cognition. So I also know my creative process, and I work with psychedelics in a way that helps me map knowing where I'm at in my creative process so that I can leverage that mode of cognition to help me create. And one of the things that's really powerful when we think about creativity is that it starts with your imagination. It starts with a vision. Every idea was a thought in your mind before you created it. And so this is where sort of the root of creativity, like what Sir Ken Robinson, who is really an amazing advocate for creativity, for changing the educational system and creativity, he says, creativity is just applied imagination. So when you go into these places, you really learn to leverage your imagination. And that's where integration for leaders and creatives is really powerful, because I really focus on visualization techniques, teaching people how to tap into visionary spaces and there's a lot of different techniques that people can learn. Because even for Olympic athletes and Navy SEALs who actually use visualization as a core training, the research says that you're not just necessarily good at visualization right away. It takes practice.
Right.
So actually, if the integration process teaches you how to work with imagination, how to work with creativity, creative thinking, visualization practices, that you can actually train yourself so that when you go and solo sit, you're really cultivating a practice that allows you to leverage what you already know. Which brings me into this whole other topic that is reframing how we work with psychedelics from a place of reducing mental illness to a place of enhancing creative cognition. And I would go as far as to say that we can actually take all of these tools of creative thinking, visualization, and apply them to people who are struggling with depression, anxiety, PTSD, and addiction. It's one of the most underutilized and unexplored, untalked about tools that I truly believe is a core. Like even going back to Jung's early work, he wrote a book, Applied Imagination, or someone else actually wrote a book about his work on applied imagination. So
Yeah.
I think that even as a tool for healing from depression is just as valid as a tool for birthing a vision that really contributes to society,
Yeah.
and that's where these medicines really help. Aligned leadership, but teaching people the power of thinking differently. And so in my Your Message is Your Medicine, these modules that I teach are really about teaching women how to step into thought leadership. So, which is a different, there's an aspect there is different than leadership. And a lot of women who come to my program are like, I never even considered like what it means to be a thought leader, and actually if I could be one, and why that's even important. And for women listening to this, like one of the things I really want people to walk away with today is knowing that it's actually our responsibility as humans on this planet to cultivate our thought leadership. And especially right now, because it allows you to think beyond our current societal construct of belief systems. And right now, more than ever, we need people who are courageous enough to put forth new ideas. That's how we're going to change. And if we don't put forth new ideas, and let me tell you, like, I'm someone who's been sort of a pioneer in my own way for these medicines for long before there was even a term for microdosing or people were even talking about it therapeutically. And so it's taken a lot of courage to really express the power of this. And it's not easy. People judge you, people throw shit at you, people want to do all sorts of things because they're like, wow, you are challenging a belief that I hold to be true, that I gain meaning from and built my life around. Don't threaten that. If you threaten that, I'm going to take you down so that I can hold my own self-identity, my own self-construct together. You know what I mean? So it is not a path for the faint of heart, but for me, and this is the women that I attract to the program, like for me, if I don't follow this impulse, this inspiration, this passion to teach this that is so clearly coming through me in such a way that is my dharma. Like I know that to be true. There are other women who feel similarly to this, but in other niches, like they have a different Venn diagram. And I actually teach women the tools like the Venn diagram, finding your niche by putting up a few different circles. And if you combine one thing with another thing, something third emerges. And what is that thing? And so a lot of the program is actually teaching women creative thinking skills, like combinational thinking, to help people advance their ideas in a way that lands for people, in a way that creates them as cultivates them as thought leaders, but in a way that's in service and contributes. And there's a lot of women coming to my programs who are in some very taboo niches. I had a woman come in who is really at the forefront of sexuality, sexual healing, as a tool for integration and combining that with psychedelics. And sex and psychedelics is a really taboo topic, but she felt similarly to me. She's like, this is my path. This is what it is. And if I don't step forward, I'm going to regret it my whole life. I'll live in regret. And at the same time, part of the teachings is like, does this mean so much to you that you're willing to walk through the fire for it? And for me, I'm willing to walk through the fire for it because there's no other choice. I'd rather walk through the fire than be in regret my whole life to my truth and honor my truth of who I am and what I'm here to offer our culture. And so those are the women that I attract, and I've trained over 70 women at this point, and it's been amazing to track people's journeys since they've gone through the program. Even, it's just been so validating in a way of like, this is needed and this is important,
Wow.
And a lot of it is teaching women like my own philosophy, but also I kind of need to lay down a certain amount of like conceptual framework for people. And then later in the program, I actually just set that foundation so that I can just show up and be in a transmission channel so that people can receive it in a way that clicks and makes sense for them to follow that in themselves. And so, a lot of the framework is like how to get into body, mind, heart alignment. How do we work with medicines to really align from a very somatic way? So there's a lot of teachings around like regulating the nervous system because, stepping out on stage and speaking in front of, hundreds of people requires that kind of resilience. And I draw a lot of parallels between what it means to sit with medicines and what it means to cultivate that kind of resilience. The medicines are teaching us exactly how to show up more resilient in these times of rapid change. And so that's like really like encouraging people to just trust that the teachings are there and they already have access to it and that they don't even need me. I'm just supporting from, in that way, but it's not about me. It's about them and their relationship to medicine.
Wow. Oh, Laura, I could listen to you for hours, and I just like appreciate your fire and your mission so much. I feel like so much of who you are and what you do is just like really embodying what you teach so that women and other leaders like myself, can see what's possible. And I just appreciate so much that you recognize and have recognized for decades the power of these medicines, but are actually mixing in the neuroscience with the magic for like you said, like architecting, how do we channel the visions and how do we channel this mission? And I also really am loving this applied imagination concept and what you said in the beginning about, this concept of either you have creativity or you don't. Like either you have a lot of imagination and that's kind of your personality, or you don't. And people that are stuck in like a depression or anxiety or PTSD or some kind of, really horrible mental state, that actually tapping into that creativity and imagination, even just to imagine a different possibility for their life, that is healing. So it's healing from that state all the way up to how can you be what you came here to be and channel your message as your mission and your medicine. So I just I feel you, Laura, and I appreciate you so, so much. And I would really love for people to know how to tap into your work, how to, find out about your workshops. I know you teach online. I know you lead some retreats in person. You have your podcast. How can people follow along with what you're doing?
Thank you so much for all those kind words and for the invitation to share where people can find me. My home base is my website, lauradawn.co. The .com was taken and it was $50,000 to buy the .com. So I was like, I think I'll just save the 50K and drop the M and just do lauradawn.co. And so that's my home base where, you can find all my latest releases of the podcast. And I'm now stewarding. I'm very grateful and honored to have bought 90 acres in Costa Rica. And so we're going to be building a center here. And after 10 years of leading retreats on the big island of Hawaii, I'm going to be starting to lead retreats here in Costa Rica. And I'm very excited about that. And then on Instagram is like my primary place, although I'm starting to become a little bit more active on LinkedIn. But my Instagram handle is at Live Free Laura D. And that's where you can follow all my things.
All your adventures. Okay, amazing. Well, I cannot wait to spend time with you in Costa Rica and just really appreciate you again, Laura. Thank you so much for your time. And
you're so welcome.
I definitely recommend everyone listening out there follow along with this incredible woman. Thank you.
One more thing that I forgot to say, Kaya.
Oh, yeah, please.
Yeah, I have a lot of amazing free downloads on my website. And
great.
So like my free 8-day microdosing course and my how to have a safe psychedelic journey at home. I have integration guides. I really have a lot that's available for reading. Also for people who are newer to the path, or if you're listening to this and you're recommending people to start journeying with medicines, I have a 45 questions to vet your facilitator or shaman or retreat center. So there's really a lot on there. And then I send out pretty regular emails that are really just like a transmission from my heart. So I really encourage people to grab one of those downloads and tune into the emails because I really share things on my email list that I don't share anywhere else online.
Oh, thank you. So glad you told us that. All right. Awesome, Laura. Take care. We'll speak again soon.
Thank you, Kaya.